Okay, we are trying to grow this hobby in. You got it running. We are trying to grow this hobby in North Texas, and I'm John Dinneen. I've flown with EOSS for many years, and I drive up there every time. Why? Because I'm retired and I can, and I want to, and I do. And my wife doesn't want to move back to Colorado, but I'm getting there as close as I can. In order to grow it, you've got to find people that want to fly. And it's one thing to go out there and fly just for the fun of it, for releasing something up to 100,000 feet, and that is a lot of fun, and we all like to do that. But I'd like to be contributing something. I'd like to be doing something. I'd like to be productive. I'm retired. I'd like to do something that's giving back to my community. And so this whole idea that Paul has really inspired all of us with over the years is working with education, getting the lights to come on in young people's minds about STEM. So I said, you know something? I'd like to start reaching out to schools and clubs in the North Texas area and see if we can get more candidates, people that are interested in putting stuff up to 100,000 feet for good science purposes, for good engineering purposes. So I said, first thing I'm going to do is put together a presentation. You know, because this is such a fantastic hobby that if you hear about it once, you're going to want to do it over and over again, right? I asked Derek because this is a guy who gets a gift of a balloon and flies across the Atlantic to come to a conference where he doesn't know anybody. So, you know, he's the perfect example of the excitement, but not everybody gets that excited. So you've got to do more than just a presentation, and that's really the story today. You've got to have a presentation, but you've also got to have a delivery system that makes sure that it all works. So outreach requires a plan. And it's not just, I'm going to deliver a presentation and wait for them to come bang my doors down. It's a multi-step process. It's not just one or two things you've got to do, but you've got to have a commitment to a long period of time, and it's going to consume a lot of resources. For us, for Michael and I and Dan from the Plano Club, it's going to require club resources because we're going to have to put the flight string together. We're going to have to provide the trackers. We're going to have to do the chasing. We're probably not going to be paid for this. We haven't been yet. But it's also going to require a lot of resources on the part of the school. So you've got to let them know up front, if you want to do this, it's a lot of work. It's really worthwhile. It's a lot of fun, but it is a lot of work. And it needs a lot of attention to all of the flight details. What we did with Plano Senior High School is we basically told them, you're going to engineer this flight. You're going to put it together. You're going to plan everything. Now, are you going to turn a bunch of high school seniors loose to put all of this together and then depend that it's going to work properly? And Paul's shaking his head, absolutely not. So while they're planning, we're also planning, and then we're comparing notes. We're planning behind the scenes, just double checking their work, but that adds to the workload. It's good to have the students involved. Ours turned out more than a science project, it was an engineering project. They weren't interested in the science, they just wanted to take a picture of the curvature of the Earth from 100,000 feet. That was all the science that they had. The engineering of putting the balloon together, putting the payload string together, tracking it, figuring out what radios to use, that's what they were into, that's what they wanted to do. But we've got to maintain control as the club because we're responsible. And we had to have a lot of meetings with these groups to make it work. There's the car line that you see normally at the end of a balloon chase, and most of those are students' cars. So we focused on two area schools. We focused on Louisville High School and Plano Senior High School. We worked with AP physics and math classes at both schools. You know, why not expand the horizon? We could probably reach out to chemistry classes, math classes, but at this point, we'd like to get good at it before we try to expand it too much more. So we need to have one or two good successes under our belt. You got to have a presentation to spark the interest. I put together something that can be done in a normal class period of 50 minutes. It can be presented at schools, clubs, you name it. It's pretty generic. But you've got time constraints in a school environment because they've got regular classes, they've got exams, they've got requirements, they've got a curriculum that they've got to go to. So are you going to have the meetings in the school during class time? Are you going to do it with science clubs that might be an after-school activity? Hadn't even thought of that. Thanks for the idea because that is a good way, I think. And you got to coordinate between the groups. Fortunately, Michael and I are retired. So we can meet at a school at 9 o'clock in the morning. Most of the rest of you, you're working for a living. You haven't got time to do this. So we're kind of getting ourselves into work, but both of us enjoy doing it, so it's good for us. And you need to start early in the school year. We started this year in March. That's a little late. But, you know, we gave it a shot. And the presentation I'm going to go through very quickly because I'm not going to tell anybody in here about high-altitude ballooning. But this is a presentation you can take, you can modify it, you can use it Happy to send it to you, use it, abuse it, cut parts out of it if you like. I can send it as a PowerPoint, PPTX, PDF, and modify it as you like. So this is the start of the presentation, a cool picture from 100,000 feet by a couple of guys from a balloon. I use a lot of pictures from many clubs, mostly from EOSS because I've worked with them for so long. So I talk about what high altitude ballooning is, why we do it, what do we send up in the sky, how far does it fly, how do we track it, do others look at it, and then I cover those points one at a time going through the presentation. So what it is sending stuff up to the stratosphere, and I've tried to keep pictures involved here. And actually, I kind of like the method of using just pictures as opposed to having a lot of words on the slides, because that may be a more effective way of presenting. And they don't. But I talk about some of the things. EOSS, the Steve Spangler Day at Coors Field, I think was just such a tremendous accomplishment. And you had 8,000 young people there watching a balloon launch from out of Coors Field. Just one of the neatest experiences I've ever been involved in. And I hope that we can get together with Steve and do that again, because that was really something. And the exposure to young people. Science and math and engineering and technology can be fun. It can be stuff you really like to do. It's very important to have a good idea of exactly what you're going to have on the flight string before you put it together, right down to weights and types of cords and everything. I think the way EOSS does it, every flight goes out with one of these. If we're launching 2 balloons, we've got 2 sheets. And these things change. You'll have a Rev A, a Rev B, a Rev C. As time goes along, that needs to match. The trackers need to have this, because, you know, sometimes these come apart. And so it's really a good idea to know exactly what it is you're looking for when you're out in the field. So we're telling the students, you know, you're going to have to do one of these. You're going to have to draw one of these up. You need to be this precise about what you're doing here. Who builds the payloads? Well, we told the students you can go ahead and build your own payload. They liked that. They already had a styrofoam box that they'd made up. They figured they were just going to get a big old party balloon, put a camera or 2 in it, put it inside of a box, send it up in a field with a cell phone on it, and then they'd track it themselves, and they'd go out and find it. They thought it was going to be that easy. So we kind of educated them that maybe you ought to spend a little more time on the payload and let us help you with the whole idea of tracking and recovery. How high do we fly? This is from Stratocaster's 11 in 2013. This was a strange flight because it went east to west, but that's the way the winds were at that time of year. And I love these graphics, and that give the kids an idea of what the path actually looks like. But then I talk about floaters or long-distance flights. This is one that was talked about a little while ago where you have to use a cut down because off to Nebraska it goes if you're not careful, and trackers run out of gas and time and bladder room. So you've got to be appreciative of all of that. And then we talk about the true long-distance stuff, the flights to Morocco from California. And then I go into the balloon itself and why the balloon pops and how it pops, you know, why it comes back to Earth. And I found that this was a pretty good series of pictures that these guys put on their website because I had never seen it in this granular fashion. And now that I've looked on YouTube, there are even better examples than this out there with some of the high-speed cameras we've got. So how do we track our payloads? And I went back to the stories about how we used to do it back in the 90s, and it was done with charts and grids and protractors and DF readings and people being deployed all over the place and losing radio contact with each other, and you just have no idea how difficult that was. And yet, when we started doing this, Chris, Benji, Larry, I mean, that's what we did. That was the only way to do it, and EOSS got pretty good at it, and we didn't lose any. Almost lost one, but we didn't. But the hardest part is the dispersion of trackers, the simplex limitations, just lots of problems. So now that we've got APRS, and Steve, I love to brag on that vehicle you had, and now you don't even have it anymore. And there I am showing how you can really equip a truck with radios and computers. This starts to get students' interest. You mean you can do all this stuff with electronic gear? I got to see that. I want to know how that works. So, you know, this kind of opens the eyes a little bit, says maybe this would be fun. But we talk about how we use amateur radio to do this. Could you do it without amateur radio? The answer is, yeah, probably. These days you could with GPS and the various types of radios that are out there. But wouldn't you rather have a crew of people working with you that has done this before and has a pretty good idea of where it's going to go and how it's going to work? And, of course, then you get into how do you do predictions. Talk a little bit, Nick, about TrackPoint and an actual picture from my screen. I actually kludged this together, but I wanted to give them an idea of this is what I'm looking at in my vehicle when I'm driving down the road, trying to figure out where that balloon is going next. And then I show what our vehicles looked like back in the 90s and early 2000s with the various arrays of antennas. And USS 100, where we actually had the helicopter, along with the big DF. They get a kick out of the fact that somebody's driving down the road at 70 miles an hour doing this out the window with their arm. And Chris, Benji, you guys perfected the method, you know? It was, yeah. But nowadays, you got the Doppler arrays, and you don't have as much of the DFing stuff, but you're still working with radio, but it looks a little nicer than it used to. Then I talk about the fact that the way our payloads are done and the fact that we're putting them into the APRS servers means that anybody anywhere in the world can watch your flight. And you can cover other people's flights, and they can watch yours. So what you're doing up there is very much public, and we talk about the fact that there are groups all over the world that do this all the time. Also talk about people just showing up and asking what you're doing because, you know, students are going to be out in the field with us and we're going to be out there. 2 rules we got. Number 1, you don't go onto somebody's property without their permission. There's a lot of good reasons for that, including guns. And number 2, when you do decide to go out there, you might have somebody come walking up and say, "What are y'all doing?" And we get that in Texas. That's exactly the way it sounds. We had a lady come down the street from Plano. She said, "I saw you. Is everybody okay?" "Oh, yeah, we're fine." Fortunately, the payloads landed just over the fence. We did not have to get property owner permission because we were able to reach over the fence, pick it up, and pull it back in. So we didn't go onto the land. We landed by the road. UFO mistakes. Then I talked about needing to use DF equipment, and we got another EOSS picture there, but we actually talk about how at the end you might need to use these very specialized antennas to track your way into a field or into the woods. I talk about the fact that we can actually get there to see them come down, and that gets them excited. "You're going to get us out there so we see it come down?" I said, "You know, I can't promise you. I'd say we got a 30 to 40% chance, depending on what the prediction looks like. It can happen." We've had groups of students where I've literally been on a road in Colorado, and I'll be standing out there on a clear day, and, you know, TrackPoint is telling me, "Okay, it's this way and that far up," and I look up, and there it is. And the next thing you know, Marty says, "Okay, I'm going to send the students over there," and I got 15 students standing around me saying, "Where is it? Where is it?" And you point to the little dot at 90,000 feet. And if they get to see it in the sky, that's cat's meow. They love that stuff. So sometimes we see them come down. Sometimes this is Stratocaster's 11 again. That's literally where it came down on the frontage road on I-35. I have not touched that. That's the payloads lying off the side of the highway. Yeah, well, and then, you know, of course, 2013 was the year of power lines, right? For Colorado. I mean, I remember this one. And we had a bunch of students standing out there all looking at it. And of course, as those 2 wires are being pulled together, you see these sparks arcing. Students love this kind of stuff too. They hope this happens, you know. "Oh yeah, this will be cool. We're going to have a fun day in the field." Was this the shotgun party? Yeah, this was the shotgun party. This is where it got into the trees and over the line, and the guy come up, going to shoot it out of the trees. You got a bunch of students standing around you. That should scare you to death. But it can happen. Well, tell me, you don't think they're used to it in Texas? Okay, who do we do this for? We're doing it for ourselves because we have fun doing it, but we're really doing it for these students that have put a lot of time and effort into building all of their payloads. So we got Colorado Space Grant Consortium, we got Women in Aerospace Leadership Development that we did down there in Hillsborough, Texas for UT. And I mean, those young ladies, they had the greatest time, and they loved every minute of it. Plano Senior High School is what we just did, so this is a picture from just a couple of weeks ago. And I am telling you, literally, from where my car is to this fence line is maybe 8 feet. And they're standing there, and the payloads are right here on the other side of the fence. They think, "Oh, this is easy." And there's power lines on both sides of the street, and we didn't hit them. And I don't know how, because it came in that way, and got power lines running this way. But there it was lying on the ground. And TrackPoint Nick had it nailed. I'm driving down the street, and I see me, and I see it, and I stop, and I get out of the car and look, and there it is. And again, Colorado Space Grant Consortium. So I'm also trying to get high school kids excited about the fact that this is something that's normally done at the college level. But I want to add a slide in here about the 4th grade class from Denver, because I want them to know that if 4th graders can do it, you should be able to do it too. So there's 2 ways of trying to promote. I'm trying to get the kids excited. That's what I want to do when I'm standing in front of them. So who does it? And I talk about all the groups that have been here with GPSL for years, try to put all the logos up. And then I talk specifically about our area of North Texas and Oklahoma. Did this presentation in Oklahoma for a little ham convention that went on, so we made sure to get, and Harry came down, and what did we have, 3 people in the room? But you know, somebody calls and says, come do the presentation, you try it. So these are our 3 groups, Plano, PHAB, Stratocasters, and ArboNet. We're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And lately what we've been doing is we've been doing every single one together. We all try to show up for each other's launches, and it's keeping us busy, and I think it's making us better at it too, which is also good. I then show a sample flight. There's a man who did this flight for his son, and he sent up a camera with this little doll, his son, the superhero, and it literally takes about 5 minutes, and it gives the whole ride going up, nice and gentle. Then it does post-burst chaos, and round and around it goes, and then down it comes, and then it shows them tracking in. But it lets them see the kinds of images that they're going to get from that altitude. And this father that did this for his kid really got some great pictures, and it's a little YouTube video. And then I talk about the crazies from Worldview Enterprises of Tucson who are going to send up a barrel like this, and that's going to have 8 human beings in it, and you can ride on that for $75,000 each. Who wants to go first? For $100,000, yeah. Yeah. But, you know, what is the application of this stuff? Well, number 1, you can go to near space and do things, but number 2, people are going to be doing rides like this, and you will have learned about it by doing a project like that. So that's the presentation. Normally takes 50 minutes because I'm talking to people that might or might not know anything about high altitude ballooning, and I'm trying to give them an idea of it. So the only thing I'm going to say on this slide before I turn it over to Mike, because Mike really nailed Plano Senior High School. I went to Louisville High School, and I did the presentation, and I made a couple of follow-up calls, and I got nowhere, okay? So I learned from failure. I didn't have enough of a plan. I didn't have myself mapped out. I didn't go back and do the follow-up meeting just with the teacher, but that's very different than what Mike did. So Mike, why don't you come on up? This is Mike, KE5VCT. This is his first time at GPSL, and he is a presenter. And I'm going to tell you, he's up here because he deserves to be up here because of what he accomplished, and I'll let him tell you.
Okay. Okay, can I have the click? Oops.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no.
Let me.
Some assembly required. Let me tell you a little bit about Plano ISD. Thanks. Plano ISD has 3 senior high schools, each with about 2,700 students. Plano ISD has a centrally developed curriculum, and not only that, they teach it in lockstep across every high school. So you could go from one high school on one day, and on the next day, you would in fact be still at the same point in your course at a different high school. It's very difficult to crack into that sort of an environment because it's so highly structured. So how did we make these inroads? Last year, I happened to meet the dads of one of the students in Plano Senior, that's one of the high schools, and told them about the ballooning activities that I was involved in, ham radio, etc. And so I did some evangelizing, if you will. Didn't really think much about it at that time, but said it was, you know, really cool, and I had been to several flights. So this last March, I get an email from the teacher of the student whose dad I had talked to. Would you be interested in helping us with a balloon flight? The balloon flight that they had structured was, let's say, very primitive, but kind of an easy-to-do project. It would have been launched from their athletic field to maybe 500 feet, which probably would have been illegal because they were within 35 nautical miles of DFW airspace. Then with a cut-down device, they were going to kind of retrieve their payload. So the first thing we kind of gently suggested is that this won't work. You really need some help. That really was the kickstart, this back channel, if you will, into working with the teacher. Okay, where do you go from here? You need to, when you go this path, you need to build up rapport with the teacher first. You cannot kind of hijack the curriculum. The students are in fact being measured upon how well they are doing in this teacher's class. So there is a period where you have to build up rapport with the teacher, then with the students. Okay. So, okay. All right, what am I not clicking here? Battery backwards? Okay, thanks. So the first thing that we did, the presentation you just saw that John gave, was our first step to getting involved with the students. This was one section of 5 in Plano Senior. We started with this 45-minute presentation because that would fit into what a normal class period allowed us for time. And then through a series of emails, you start building up rapport as to where do you want to go next. Now, as a radio club member, you've got to be available, which means I'm fortunate enough to be retired. Most of us still work. So somebody from the radio club end needs to provide continuity in terms of dealing with the students and the teacher especially. You need to get the buy-in from the students, but here's where I've perceived the real advantages to what we're doing. Without motivation, you don't have learning. What ballooning brings is this degree of enthusiasm that makes learning possible. Funding tends to be an issue. We all know that balloons cost money, so does the gas. It turns out this teacher actually asked for contributions from his students, so there was nothing in the budget, and the students were willing to pay for it. My next challenge as a former project manager was to assign roles to them in a sort of gentle way. And the key role really is the flight director role. This is a glorified title for a project manager, but I wanted the students to do this, but in a structured way. So you will see in a moment here a template that I kind of created that was partially filled out with the student's flight director responsible for getting his team people's buy-in on the various aspects. So those are the active roles. There's going to be considerable back and forth of revisions of this flight plan document. So we need the standard kind of a versioning system, which is also very typical if you've worked in any sort of engineering environments. And then this aspect here, set date and time. It is my experience as an Eagle advisor in our Boy Scout troop where I had to review Eagle projects that students in the 17 and 18-year-old age bracket have a lot of difficulty with sort of time frame, understanding a time frame. What it means, for example, to have job dependencies or task dependencies. For example, you can't launch a balloon without having the balloon, and you can't have the balloon without having a funding source. So there are dependencies, some of which can be done in parallel, and others are critical in terms of their sequentiality. Backup dates. A balloon launch is not like scheduling an exam. You have to allow for bad weather and for other things. You have to, for example, schedule around vacations, you have to schedule around holidays. Most of the people on the radio club side are going to be working, so weekdays are out, these sorts of things. And then the other issues like launch site and a communications plan. Okay, next. So this is sort of the sample document that I put together. I'm a big believer that a project plan should not be an exercise in creative prose, like you might write a novel. It needs to be table-driven, with the essential data, enough that you can actually make anyone successful in terms of the level of detail, but not so much that nobody will read it. So the first thing that I found was critical, which was missing from the instructor's class, was a mission statement. What is it that we're trying to do? So that was the response that the flight director, the student, put in after getting input from his class. Table 1, a timeline. And again, as I just explained, this is an area where it took several passes to get them to kind of come up with something that looked reasonable. So everywhere you see the italics, those are kind of placeholder pieces of verbiage that the students would have to kind of research and populate. So you can read some of these things here. We have a coordination meeting, arrival at the launch site. This is basically the timeline for everything leading up to the launch. Here is the assignment of the tasks, the critical tasks. There's probably a bunch of other ones that you would want to include, but keep in mind you need to have an appropriate level of detail. So procuring the balloon, the parachute, the gas. Okay, turns out we got helium, and I was very surprised at this, from Party City, who offered PISD an educational discount. So we got a 271 cubic foot cylinder, I guess that's a K3, for $83. Who in fact stored and transported it. So you will need to coach the students on the actual logistics of how the various materials get from point A to point B and assign roles. NOTAM, it turns out in my calculus classes that I taught, rule of thumb, you need to have a student, you have to expect a student to work about at 1/3 the speed that an adult does to get anything done. It's not that they can't do it, it's kind of they're overwhelmed frequently with the choices and are they doing it right, and they will take multiple paths to ultimately come up hopefully with a successful answer. So the timeline you need to build has to kind of account for the fact that they're going to move at a slower speed than one of us adults would. We did not file a NOTAM, although I would have liked to have seen this, simply because their time frame cut it so close to the actual date that we ran out of time before that. There's a 3-day window, I think, where you have to file it before. One thing I always insist on with our balloon launches, on the Friday before a Saturday launch, we have a go, no-go net. John kindly hosted this one, and the outcome is basically a decision, are we ready for launching the next day or not? And usually some other details will surface if somebody is not ready or if there is a problem. Sir. Oh. Okay. This is kind of the script that John used for the net. The key thing here is this will coordinate the radio club members, but certainly not the students. So how do we communicate the outcome of this to the students? Early on, I decided that we needed to work through the teacher, Mr. Eng, to get to the students. I really didn't want direct communications without his involvement. So in fact, yes, it does slow things down a bit because, you know, my communication with Mr. Eng, the teacher, was kind of a gating factor. But it retained control and allowed the teacher to remain in control of his students. Okay, John? Oh, okay. Okay, so we're on to various other tables. You will probably recognize a lot of the sort of structure here, the various pieces that we supplied to the students. I wouldn't expect them to be able to kind of come up with this. But for example, the balloon string and what components go where in which order, that was their job. So PSHS, Plano Senior High School, Park is Plano Amateur Radio Club. And then a few sort of useful links for them being able to monitor the progress when we would do the tracking and recovery. Okay, for our purpose, we also need a list of the participants. So this is kind of a list where there are still some indecision as to who actually could attend at this point that this was put together, and a similar table for the participating students, okay, along with sort of some logistical information, cell phone numbers, and who in fact could drive. So all of these students in fact were able to drive on their own. There was no parental involvement here, except for, the teacher was of course present, okay?
And the one important thing, the phone numbers, which you don't normally use in radio coverage, you've got a call sign. But when you're dealing with non-hams, and you've got that many of them, we use the text numbers, and they got an app called WhatsApp, they all downloaded, and they're able at the same time, they're driving down the road, sending out the alerts. They're also able to follow on APRS.FI the actual balloon. So they're really part of the chase. And we put an APRS unit in each student vehicle so that we knew where they were at all times in case something happened. We have club units that we use for very special events. So we put that. They thought it was really neat that they had the radios in the car.
Later on, we gave them an H2 to see on them.
And we should have given them
Yes.
H2s for each of the cars so we see that so that they could be listening to what we're doing from the ham club in terms of sending resources where we're sending them, making the decisions we're making, the balloon's going north, it's going south, it's going good, it's going bad. We should have thought of that earlier, but we're learning.
Sorry, one more here. One of the things the teacher, keep in mind, this was an engineering class, not a science class. So the purpose of this flight was rather different from perhaps some of the other experimental or experiments that we've been seeing in some of the flights. The purpose of the balloon flight was to be the high point of the building of the electronics and the testing, sort of the engineering methodology. There was really no scientific payload. They, of course, included multiple cameras. One of the things that I insisted on is that we have some sort of a feedback session. This is common in engineering. You kind of have somebody who's funding your efforts to put this thing together, this project together. Well, that somebody really wants to know what the outcome was. So you need to allow a certain length of time for essentially the data analysis. We chose 10 days, and then we had a kind of a review session. So what worked, what went well, what didn't sort of almost work, and what went wrong. Okay, so we uncovered, both on our side and on their side, some issues that they would have done differently. One of the things that is big in engineering, if you've ever done this, is root cause analysis. So you have a problem and you trace back what caused it, and you might actually have several steps, and then you look for remediation of some sort to fix the problem, okay? This is how engineering works. And we discovered certain things that, in fact, we would have done differently to fix this problem here. Okay, let me wind up by next year. So just on Tuesday, this last Tuesday, I get a text message in the morning from Mr. Ng. He wants to know if we could meet, we meaning John and I. And so we meet. This is after the school year has just ended. Teachers are kind of cleaning out offices and everything, so it's like a ghost town if you've ever been in a high school where there's no students. So we sit down, and during the conversation, you know, he's very, very happy with how this project turned out. We sort of asked him, well, what do you see happening next year? Okay, so the first thing, now we had sort of gotten hints of this earlier, he's going to be moving on. So the only person who has the experience is the teacher who is now going to go to the Plano Academy. Plano Academy is a Texas Instruments funded high school which has kind of an integrated curriculum. So it is much more, it is less sort of silos, it is much more, you need multiple skills in diverse disciplines to kind of come up with your final grade. So he is a great fit, this teacher, for getting our foot in the door, except the entire next year, he's going to be doing curriculum development, no launches. Okay, the moment I hear that, I ask him, well, who is your successor in Plano Senior High School? And then I kind of, you know, gently nudged him to force an introduction. Okay, so he got his successor in, we met, and then also we sat him down and asked, so how do you think we can continue to work with your successor? And so we kind of brainstormed. And he said, well, this was kind of just a pilot project. Really, we don't just have one class, we have 5. And we have kind of 4 groups in each section. Could you launch 20 balloons at once and track them? Okay. Could you do 20? Okay. So there's a standard rule in sales. You never say no to a customer. You only let them know what it's going to cost. And you look for the eye blink test, okay? So I don't know if this 20 balloons is going to really happen. Nick, wherever you are, you might want to think about how this would affect TrackPoint. So anyways, on that somewhat humorous note, I don't think we'll have 20, but we'll certainly have more launches in the future. And I think we've made an excellent inroad in terms of building rapport and getting sort of enthusiasm built. And this will, I think, spread within the PISD. So any questions?
Maybe the next GPSL could be
So, okay, thank you.